Move forward with our panelists now. So our first speaker to talk about his house is Chris Molyneux. He's a manager of a not-for-profit program called Career Links, which works through human services to provide fast-track employment placement for individuals experiencing challenges in workforce participation. He's also passionate about energy efficiency and is going to come up and talk to us about his house and solar. Thank you, Chris.
I want to talk to you about the system that I had installed. I had installed at the end of September last year. It is a 5.6 kilowatt system. We have 20 200-watt LG panels married with 10 AP Systems microinverters. As you can see, we got 6 on one wall. That's our south-facing wall. And we have 14 on our back wall. That's the west-facing wall. Like I said, I had it installed at the end of September. Our installer was Virtuoso Energy. Had a great turnaround time. So they started on the 18th. They were done on the 19th. Took about a day and a half. Once everything was improved, we got it switched on September 27th in 2017. Now, I said to the people at Virtuoso that they were a little crazy for asking me to come because I got my system installed right at the dark half of the snowiest year ever. But we can show you a little bit of what's happening with this system. This is AP System website and what they show. It's really cool. They show you your carbon offsets. They show you how many trees that's equivalent to, how many lights that's equivalent to. It also comes with a phone app that if you go through with solar, you will be glued to. I became very OCD about following this all the time. You can see there some of the energy production. This is probably last week, and I think we're somewhere around a little over 2,000 kilowatt hours produced for the home. Once we got out of the insanity of the snowfall that we all dealt with, we got to see some better, more representative numbers. So far in April, we have been producing about 150% of what we need. We originally projected that around this time we would be producing about 100%, maybe a little bit less. So we're really happy that they've exceeded our expectations. You can see our average consumption was 17 kilowatts per day, and we're producing on average since the 22nd, 25 kilowatts. So it's been great. I was asked to talk about some of the techie stuff. So the orientations of the panels, as you can see, the south is on the left and the west is on the right. So I get a lot of questions about how they perform. What you're looking at is the amount of kilowatt hours they produce on average every day within the last 30 days. And our west panels actually produce about 94% of what our south panels are doing. So we're quite happy with that. I don't know if that's the norm. We don't have anything behind us on the west side, so maybe that's why. But we're seeing great production from the west side. Challenges. As you can expect, we've all been dealing with this challenge. I'm sure you guys are tired of shoveling. This was an example of December and the last week in December. You can see how drastically the production decreased, and that was a significant challenge for us. Not only was the snow coming, but it was a very cold winter, which means the snow wasn't melting. Now, typically, with my experience, it's at -5, it's going to start slipping off those panels. But we were dealing with far colder than that and for long stretches of time. So that was an actual challenge. A lot of people ask me about snow on the panels, and yeah, it's real. It's a real challenge. But I found a solution. And that is it's a $100 snow rake that I got from Amazon. This is a multi-position ladder. And what you see there is a towel. and some duct tape. So what I did was I duct taped a towel to that snow rack, and unfortunately I came up with this solution at the beginning of April. A little late, but it worked like a charm. So I had no problem in completely clearing off the panels right away, and it's a pretty good workout, and it's a reason for me to get outside. Another question that they asked me to speak to was how it changes your behavior. When I first started getting the quotes for the installation, that was one of the big things that I kept hearing is not only are you going to get these solar panels and you're going to have this great positive effect from them, but you're going to start thinking green everywhere and all the time. And that is absolutely true. Not only did we become cheapskates and think about how are we going to make more money off of this? So everything we do, laundry, dishes, that happens only while the sun is shining. So that's always Saturday and Sunday, that's when we do it. And that way we save money on the transmission and distribution costs. But we went insane with everything. Energy efficient light bulbs. I stopped charging my phone at night because I heard that's wasteful. Turning off your computers. We don't have the TV as white noise in the background, which used to be very comforting for me. Now that's gone. So the little habits definitely change, but also you start making big changes. I didn't feel happy enough with just the panels and just what we were doing with offsetting our dirty grid. So about a month after that, I went and looked for a new car. Now, I'm nonprofit, so I don't have a Tesla. So for everyone who has a Tesla, you guys are awesome. But I went Prius, but it's a lot better than a Jeep, which is what I was driving. And I think you become a little bit annoying after you get solar because I've been pushing it on everyone, especially my work. And my work gave me the green light to get proposals. And actually this Friday is when we're going to sit down and go through the proposals, but they are very excited about it. You're going to start pushing it on your neighbors and everyone, but they're very happy to hear about it. And it looks like, at least with my work, which is a very big building, they're going to be going as solar as well. Thank you. You guys, you liars, you weren't clapping, it was just that one person. So as far as the savings, again, I was asked to break down the dollars a little bit, which I thought was funny because, again, I got it at the dark half of the snowiest year we've experienced in 40-odd years. But I can show you a little bit. This is just kind of a beginning analysis. This is how much we produced from the panels, so a little over 2 megawatts. How much we consumed and how much we sold. Because we're regular people, we have day jobs. The majority of it is sold because we're producing during the day and we're not using during the day. But we did consume close to half. And these are the prices I'm paying. Apparently, a bunch of people have told me I'm getting ripped off, so you guys can laugh at my rates. But I thought I'd share it with all you strangers. Yeah, and it's $200-odd. But again, this is really not when you make a lot of money from solar. It's the following months where you're going to be making far more. And this, I'm expecting to see far more. As you saw in April, we are above net zero now, and we only go higher throughout July and to start lowering, but not by much, to the end of September, which makes a full year for me. But to be honest, I don't. This wasn't really of interest to me. I know this is one of the main questions. All the cheapskates come out of the woodwork when you get solar. They all want to know how much money you're going to save and whether they're going to get a complete turnaround in 6 months. No, you're not. Just so you know. But I actually didn't ask any of the installers about my payback period because I wasn't terribly interested. We took out a loan for this, and we're not extremely wealthy people, but we thought this was something that we had to do, and we knew it was going to make a big difference. So what we considered were a couple things. One, we know that 16% of the greenhouse gases in Canada are coming from electricity generation. And we also know Alberta has the great pride of having the dirtiest grid out of all provinces. So I had a daughter in 2016, and she's almost 2 years now. And for all the parents in here, you know that once you have a child, you begin thinking about how your actions affect their future and what kind of world you're going to leave for them. And I know it's a bit of a cliched sentence, but it's true. And this is why we did it. And I can tell you the one thing about it, and I'm sure I'm going to sound super arrogant by saying this, is you feel better about yourself, you sleep better at night, because you know you've made a right decision. Anyway, thanks guys. That's my experience.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Really like that. I love how you touched on that very special day that you have in the year when you have solar on your house. And that's the day that you start to net positive generate. And it's a different day on the calendar every year, but it's an exciting day. So I'll move this over. Luc, you can get started there. So Luc Savoie is our next speaker. He's a father of 3, so I think we're going to hear about the kids as well. I think that's going to be a common theme with a lot of this. They're now young adults, not so cute maybe. Do we get a photo of them, Luc? No, okay. He's been interested in renewable energy since the turn of the century, which makes you sound really old.
I am. Older than dirt.
As a professional geologist, he's worked in mineral, coal, oil, and gas industries over the last 30 years, and he believes in a balanced approach to making our spinning blue marble a better place for his children and their children. I love that he threw out a quote here from Gandhi, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." That's something I believe as well. I look forward to hearing about your house.
Thank you. Welcome. So I've had the opportunity to do this not once, but twice. So my whole presentation is on going through this 2 times. So this is the tale of 2 solar arrays. I'd like to thank Skyfire Energy, who actually installed both of my arrays. Really good guys, really competent. And the Alberta Renewable Energy Alliance, which I'm part of, a group of guys that hang out together and talk renewable energy and try to push the government into policy. So, Solar Array 1, installed in 2008, so 10 years ago now. That's what it looks like, 36 modules, 200 watts each for a total of 7.2 kilowatts. Pretty impressive. At the time, it was the largest residential array in Calgary. When I get to the price tag, you'll understand, yeah, that wasn't so pretty. So specifications, 2008, 7.2 kilowatts, grid connected, no batteries, 36 by 200 watt modules. They were Sanyo high efficiency, so I bought the highest efficiency modules I could find at the time, which were about 16% efficient. The inverter was a Sunny Boy 7000. Monitoring, I didn't have any monitoring. I was too cheap to buy the $1,000 monitoring module, so instead I actually wrote down numbers. I'll get to that a little bit later. Wiring, 6 strings to a distribution box in the attic. So 6 strings going to 6 modules each. The bad part about that back then is that if there's any shading on any one of those modules, it would actually knock out the entire string. So just keep that in mind for things that have changed. Orientation, 154 degrees. So basically south-southeast. Roof slope, 30 degrees. Install time was 2.5 days. I was redoing my roof at the same time. So we wiped out, took off all the roofing and set up the solar. And here's the kicker, the cost. Brutal, $62,000. I had a hard time justifying that to my wife, and we'll understand a bit later how that went. Solar array number 2. So this one different house, installed last summer in 2017. So the first thing you'll notice that there's a whole lot less modules, but it's about the same as far as the kilowatts. So specifications, 2017, 6.48 kilowatts, so just slightly less than my other array. This is 24 times 270 watt modules. And the important part here is the P300 optimizers, and I'll explain that just a bit later. Canadian Solar is the manufacturer. Solar Edge SE6000A is the inverter. Monitoring is beautiful. So now I can turn on my cell phone, I can check what the array's doing. My partner calls me, I say, yeah, it's good to do the dishes, it's good to do the laundry. Wiring, 2 strings with optimizers. So the nice thing about optimizer is if one module gets shaded, it doesn't affect the rest of them. It compensates for it. So that's really important in a big comparison to the old array. Orientation is about the same. Roof slope is pretty well identical. Install time was 2 days. And here's the kicker, the cost. So in a period of 9 years, we went from $60,000 to about $18,000 for essentially the same array. So that's 1/3 the cost of 9 years ago. Then you add to that the incentive from the provincial government. That knocks off another approximately $5,000. So now I'm down to $13,000. So you're looking at about 1/5 of the cost of what it cost 9 years ago. It's getting a whole lot more attractive. Incentives. So in 2009, I wrote the provincial government saying, hey, I put in this array, is there any kind of money? And I got this beautiful letter from the minister saying no. But what they did point out was that they were doing Microgeneration Regulation. And that's kind of an important bit and a really good start because there wasn't a whole lot of regulations back when I installed mine. A lot of crazy rules that I think were kind of made up on the way. You know, I had to find my house plans from the builder, which cost me $200. I had to meet a guy in a dark alley. And compare that to today. So provincial government, the NDP, are giving you 75 cents a watt. So there's my $5,000. Yeah. Really good incentive. So if you look at the growth of solar in Alberta, and thank you to Gordon Howell, who keeps these numbers going and puts out this graph periodically. So if you look back to when I installed the first solar array, it was back pre-2009, so there wasn't a whole lot of solar going on in Alberta. Compared to solar array 2, and you see there's a huge uptake, and NDP came in at about 2015, I think that's correct, 2015 or so, mid through 2015. So there's been a market increase in solar, which is good. Comparing back to solar array 1 in 2008, this was my tracking. Like I said, I went outside, I read the meter, I went downstairs, I read the inverter meter, I typed it into Excel. If you're an engineer, that's fun. I'm not, so it isn't. And you'll notice that the dots get further apart as time goes on. Really active in the bottom, not so active in the later years. But you get the slope and you kind of understand that, yeah, it's doing okay. Tracking in 2017, much better. So you can get daily, monthly, yearly. And you know, the beauty of this is we use the daily to guide when we run our dryer. So my partner here in the stands basically will call me up. How's the solar doing? Yeah, it's doing fine, honey. Go ahead, run the dryer. I'm working all day. She's at home working. But we don't run our dryer at night. We really don't. Actually, I did laundry last night, and I didn't do the dryer, and she ran it today. So you become anal, like you said, right? You start to think about things. And part of it is you can show the actual array and see how each individual module is actually doing. So solar array concerns. Snow. So that's one of the first questions people ask. Well, what do you do with snow? I, like you, I got a snow brush. I get up there and I pull snow off when I have to. But for the most part, really, as long as the sun comes out, and I've seen this at negative 16 degrees, sun hits the array, a little bit of black shows through, it actually starts to melt. So even at negative 16, negative 20, you'll still get melting and it'll slough off. And really, it's not that long of a period of time before it actually clears off, unless you get really heavy snow, and then I too get up on a ladder and use a snow brush. The other concern is hail. For my first array, it got hit by golf ball sized hail and nothing. The cement tile on the roof ended up with 6 tiles cracked, one of them with a hailstone that went clear through. The array, nothing. And I think there's a good video online of a 2-inch hailstone hitting a module, no problem. Although I think there was a recorded kind of baseball size hail that actually damaged a solar module that was flat lying. But usually you're raised up at an angle so they're glancing blows. Now the other 2 big concerns and the problems I had are these 2 people, pigeons and squirrels. So I had pigeons take nesting up underneath, and my son's room was right underneath there, and he could hear them cooing every morning. It was kind of fun for the first 3 days and then not so fun. So really, although people haven't historically, I think, put mesh along the bottom, personally I think it's a good idea, having suffered through pigeons and squirrels. I'm not going to go through this slide because it's going to take too much time. This is net billing versus net metering. In Alberta, we have net billing, which basically you get money back for the electricity you produce, but it doesn't include all the other stuff that you get billed for. Personally, I think net metering makes a lot more sense. If they didn't switch out your meter to a bidirectional meter, you'd actually be doing net metering, but that's why I think ENMAX is so quick to turn and put your bidirectional meter in. It's a whole other conversation, just want to touch on it, look it up. My bills, this is for September, so you can see that the energy used and the energy produced more or less offsets itself. And this was in September. So it improves kind of from this month clear to September. So why did I do solar? For the first array, I was replacing my roof anyways, and I was interested in it. I have 3 early teen kids at that time, and I thought they would get a lot out of learning that, hey, you can do this, it's possible. The return on investment for the first array was over 30 years. Bad, very bad. I could have bought a new vehicle, and this is how I justified it. You could buy a new vehicle for $60,000. In 15 years, it would rust out, and you'd have 0. I got an array, which my ex-wife now owns. That's the other part of it. So she's enjoying it, which is good. You always worry about potential increase in energy prices, and how is that going to affect your bill? And really, after doing EE, energy efficiency, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, insulation, whole light bulbs, all that sort of thing. That's really what you should target first before you even look at solar. For the second array, I had 3 young adults that will be future leaders. My return on investment on the second array is more like about 7 years, which is quite reasonable. We're saving money by doing laundry when the sun shines. The incentive program is a huge thing to take advantage of, and it's the right thing to do after doing EE. So there's a few examples of energy efficiency, water, light bulbs, insulation, thermostat, windows. But the real reason that I did solar was this, very much along the sides of your 2-year-old. Well, I got 3 kids now that are 20, 22, and 24, and I really think about their future quite a bit. What kind of world are they going to live in when I'm dead and gone? And I think that if we can make a difference, we should do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Luc. You're right on time. I mean, that was great. Thank you. Making my job easy. Our next speaker is Deane Stewart. He's a retired engineer who built engineering and financial software for the oil and gas industry. He's lived in Calgary for over 40 years. He enjoys technical and software side of solar, so I think we're going to hear more about how the numbers and graphs and things like that, which I really like as well. He started driving electric cars in 2016 and currently is designing his next home to be entirely off the grid. So come on up, Deane, let's hear your story. Which region? Screen. There we go.
All right, thank you very much. I was going to be here tomorrow night, but nobody else was, so I thought I'd come tonight. Thanks. So I'm fairly new to the actual using of solar. I put it in about a year ago. I have our house, so we put in a fairly robust system, and I want to talk about some of the nuances. The previous speakers here have covered many things I can make the same comments on about snow, and I have my own battles with that this year because I'm on a flatter roof than either one of you guys, and I can't get there. So that one really put a bit of a kibosh in. But anyway, to get going, so my system that we have in is it's a solar plus Powerwall 2 battery system, and so we're going to talk probably more on that side of things tonight and let the solar for the previous speakers speak for itself as well. So the system has 28, so it's a 9.5 kilowatt hour, or kilowatt, sorry, system, 7,600 watt inverter. As I think previously talked about, having those, it's key to have those individual optimizers on the panels and so on, especially with the snow. As I watched the snow melt panel by panel, I could see one come on, and even, and if you'd had to wait for the entire grid, you would have lost another several weeks of power. So that was a big part of that. And then tied to that inside, of course, is two Powerwall 2 battery systems, and they have their own inverters built in. So I'll talk a bit about why I went that way and what's sort of key about the house along the way. So this is what my garage looks like right now. And I'll talk about the design challenges as we come. There's a lot of boxes here, as it turns out. When I first moved in, there was the one box on the left. That is my power drop panel from the main utility into my garage. As many modern houses do nowadays, the power drops into the garage and then drops into the house, into the basement. I live near a river. That's actually now code that the power must drop and be cuttable above the flood zone so that the utilities can come in, disconnect it, because you don't want to be standing in the basement full of water as you're trying to disconnect your power systems, right? So I had two things. I had a lot of space in the garage, which was better than my basement, and it also made a lot more sense from just a resilience point of view. The other panels that we go through here, 3 of those boxes are just cutoff switches. So, the code comes into play here a lot. You've got multiple systems. You've got a solar system providing power. You've got the grid providing power. You've got the Powerwalls being able to provide up to 10,000 watts of power. So everything wants to go both directions. And so this is actually before we got labeling them. If I took the current sticker, there's about 27 red stickers on the outside of these, warning everybody that every piece of electronics can come from more than one direction. In other words, just because you cut off one panel doesn't mean you're safe. There still could be power coming the other direction. Anyway, I'll talk more about the design challenges and why we did what we did here on the next couple of slides. One of the first big challenges I have and why I went this way is I do drive a Tesla. And I love it. It was always a dream of mine. I think I was one of the first people to put some money down. So when I finally got that, it came through, it showed up, and it starts using up some electricity. You know that it's better. You can feel good. You can do the math. But when you see your power bill, when you can work it out. A Tesla this Model X uses about 23 kilowatt hours of power for every 100 kilometers you drive. Okay, so this all works out. If in today's gas prices, it's somewhere around 140 miles to the gallon. So it's really good. Again, you can't do better. But when you look at it on your home power bill and how much power you're using, it really does use a lot of power. Like if I drove out today, to Cremona and back, drove down south and back, I put 200 kilometers on, I come home in, I plug it in. That's 50 kilowatt hours of power right there, right? And so there's a combination of batteries that need to be used and everything else. One of the nice things I'd like to hope for in the future is that the battery inside the car is actually 6 times the size of a Powerwall battery. It's 90 kilowatt hours of battery. Most people who look at solar plus battery are not putting in 90 kilowatt hour battery systems on their houses. It's actually a really big battery. I'm hoping, and part of maybe in my own internal sales job of why I went with Powerwall 2, because I had the Tesla car, they install their special gateway, which controls it all. And there's a hope that someday they will allow the so because they have digital communication between all the pieces, that they may be one of the first ones to let me charge back into the house in an emergency, obviously, and use up some of that car. That's hopefully coming down the road. So my big challenges and why I went down solar. One, I'm a engineer, and I'm fairly geeky engineer, if you would, and I've always loved solar panels. And solar power. I love the concept of something for free, if you would, and it's the ultimate cumulative investment. If you just get it going, it starts creating something from nothing for all intents and purposes. You have the capital investment. It starts to create further and further. And I guess to me, it seems like an inevitable path for the planet to just. And I think we're now reaching that tipping point, as it seems fairly obvious that the investment level has now gotten to the point where the returns on that are starting to generate enough cash that they can now be put back in and so on. So I do view it as very inevitable. My house in particular is in a potential flood zone. In 2013, we were about 3 or 4 feet short of being flooded. So I could look at it and I can stand on the edge of it, but it didn't actually make it to the house. But obviously things like sump pumps running are very key to me, making sure they run off for a power outage and so on. As I said, the garage was a great place to put the equipment, whereas my basement has a distribution panel that's stuffed in the basement in a small little utility room and would have been very difficult to work down there. Against somewhat of the advice of my installer, we went through and measured all the loads and tried to figure out which should be which. I went with a whole home backup. In other words, because it was so simple, all the power coming out of the garage is a single wire that goes to my basement and feeds my entire electrical system that's all nicely wired in. So it was a lot easier just to back up that whole thing. Now that said, I also have a couple of air conditioners on the house. There's dryers, there's all these other things that could suck down a 28 kilowatt hour battery in the matter of minutes or hours, single digit hours. So we tried to mitigate that a bit by taking all the high load items off. So we have the whole home without the AC, without the oven, without the dryer, without the car charger. And I'll show you some graphs later of the car charger. It does dwarf the entire system. So you have to be very careful, because if it's plugged in, it will just take the entire battery, kind of thing. So it gives me a lot of flexibility, obviously. If I used to do this in my previous homes when I had a little old 1200 watt generator sitting in the garage somewhere just in case the power went out. I would understand my power system. I'd have my panel marked with, these are the ones that everybody goes off except for these 3, and turning it back on, and even to the point of mapping it so I could do illegal things like backwire my panel with my generator. I'm enough of an engineer that I felt confident once I put the work in. And I'm confident here too that we can manage the house in a blackout. One thing I did have to spend was a $9 item. I think it was shipped from China. And it's just this, if you plug it in, and it makes this high-pitching screaming siren when the power goes out. I had to plug it into the non-backed up side of the house, because my biggest worry is I'm sitting at home cooking a turkey in the oven with the dryer on and so on, or even just the normal load of the house, and I have no idea the power's gone out because the Powerwalls have kicked in, everything's running just fine. Well, that would be the time when you want to start making choices. Obviously this is time to batten down the hatches, shut down what you don't need. But so I actually had to add an audible alarm, which quite piercing through the house, say the grid is down. which is one of the things I was a little disappointed in the Powerwall software, that they don't, you can look at it as when it happens, but it doesn't sort of start beeping and flashing and really telling you, because this can be quite important, obviously, at that point. You want to minimize your loads and move on. Unlike my previous speakers, I think my house, well, it uses a lot of power. It's a big house, to be fair. I have busy children and so on, and I have my electric car, which again, when I look at the kilowatt hours per year, it essentially doubled to tripled the amount of power I use. And my average house uses about 30 kilowatt hours a day if it just sits and runs along with everything, people turning things on whenever they want. The car doubles to double and a half that. I've hooked up some more equipment that burns another sort of a little bit more than that even. So I can't say I'm really an electricity conservative person, but I do understand what I'm burning, and I guess I'm trying to mitigate that along the way and do what I can and see how it goes. On the snow side of things, we went with a flat installation, I think as we've seen everywhere, without a big rack. I'm on a fairly low 312 thing, and it's very hard to get to. So I spent November, December, January, February, I think I produced about 350 kilowatt hours of power out of the array, which was quite bad. But at the end of the day, I could have got up there more often and shoveled more, but it is standing up on next year I may put up some ladders and things like this and some guardrails, because right now it felt very precarious where I happened to have to stand, and falling off a roof didn't seem worth the extra few bucks in solar power. So one of the things I want to spend most of the rest of the time talking about is the Powerwall, because again, solar is solar. We can all optimize that as we go. So I put in 2 Powerwalls. They were one of the first few that we managed to get here in Alberta. They are very much a turnkey system. In other words, they come from Tesla. They have 4 wires or something to hook up to them. And then you turn them on and they talk to Tesla, and you talk to the Tesla app, and away you go. So they're very well designed and very well engineered, but they are not a home tinkerer's kind of system, right? You're not just going to decide today I'm going to take off half the battery system and do this or that or the other thing. They very much are a turnkey. The interface that they have, makes it very easy. They sort of have 2 concepts. One is the self-consumption versus backup, and they do recognize that. So for instance, my own use, in the deep winter when we're really have no chance of making much power back to the grid anyway, I just leave it at 100% backup. It doesn't really play much into the game at all unless the power goes out. In spring, I think I've got it set at 80% right now, starting to go. Again, as we get into around June 21st or whenever the flood was of 2013, this will probably be set back up to 100% again. So what I'm telling it is, don't cycle the batteries, just keep it. So if the power goes off at midnight, I've still got 28 kilowatt hours of battery to use, right? Otherwise, if you set it to 0, it'll just cycle entirely. So it'll charge up during the day, burn it off through the night and in the evening, and it'll probably wake up the next morning and you'll be at 0, which is fine for optimizing your T&D charges. And that's the only revenue, if you would, of these is if you let it cycle, because obviously then you can self-consume and offset even the extra T&D that you would be sending to the grid, right? I learned 2 surprising things after we installed it, not before, but they were fairly new. One was it won't charge from the grid until at least a full solar day has gone by before it's convinced there's no more solar power coming in. In other words, if I have it set to 80% right now, it's probably sitting there right now at 80%. If we wake up tomorrow morning and it's super cloudy and essentially I make nothing, it'll stay at 80% all day long. It will not go up to 100 or anything like that. Now, by tomorrow midnight, it will then say, okay, you had your chance. I'm going to actually top it up from the grid. The grid is there. You probably prefer to have it topped up. We'll take it back up to the power level kind of thing, right? It's an interesting game, and obviously when the power goes out, if you try to play with it, I'm not sure what the exact best answer there is. It does work the way it is. It just was something that I wasn't prepared for. The fact that somehow you think, well, how come the batteries aren't charged? The solar, as soon as the solar went out, it would just drain them right down to whatever level you have. It could have kept them full, but that's really not the point. The point is to use that power and then wait for it the next day. And the second noteworthy point is that the Powerwall will discharge to any load, even on the other side of the Tesla gateway. So the Tesla gateway is their automatic cutoff to the grid. If the grid goes down, it shuts down to make sure none of your stuff talks to the grid. I was quite surprised that while the grid is present, when I plugged my car in on the other side of the Tesla gateway in the non-backed up, in other words, these are just tied directly to the grid, it takes it all. The Powerwalls go to 10,000 discharge, and they send 10,000 watts to the car as fast as they can, and away goes the backup battery. So it was surprising to me. I mean, again, it's all self-consumption to me. It probably makes sense in the end of things, but somehow I sort of thought by having loads outside of the Tesla gateway, it would just ignore those, and it wouldn't worry about trying to use power there. It would use it inside the house. I have a couple more screenshots of the power of the app from Tesla, just because I thought they might provide a bit of insight. Well, first one I've already talked about, the choice between, is it just backup? Am I just sitting here waiting for the power to go out? Or am I trying to do I want to use some for self-consumption and optimizing that? And then the graph on the right is what you get every day, and this comes back to this and the next ones. So this is a day in October, I believe it was, when I took a screenshot. So the house is running at looks like about 1,800 watts constantly across. It's sort of the blue line. So solar comes on. We got about 6,000 watts out of our peak of 7.5 out of the system. You can see that at about 8 in the morning, as the solar exceeded the consumption, we started sending green into the Powerwall. So it charged the Powerwall back up. And then after that, we had to just shipping it to the grid. So then everything after the Powerwall is full, my batteries are full, I got nowhere else to go. We get off our cheap power without our T&D back off to the grid. Might as well make what we can at that point. And then you'll notice just at the edge, it's not a great picture, but just as the edge, as the solar dies, you can see the green actually come back above zero. In other words, now the Powerwalls are kicking in saying, okay, I've got power. So each Powerwall has a 5,000 watt inverter in it. So the two of them act together as a 10,000 watt supply. They're AC coupled. In other words, the solar edge inverter sits tied into the same panel with the Tesla Powerwalls. There's no DC-DC connection, so the solar cannot charge your Powerwall. You must go through an inverter to charge into the Powerwall. A little bit more efficient makes them obviously very more agnostic to, I don't know what you have out there. I don't know how you're going to charge it in. If you show me with 240 volt, AC power, I can charge and I can work with that kind of thing, right? So very happy. I use this one, I think, which of you mentioned how you just get addicted to your phone? Yeah. Well, I get this every day. You're like, oh, it's sunny. I wonder what it looks like. Oh, it's so. I just plugged in my car. I wonder what it looks like. Well, this one shows you exactly sort of, the top, what's coming out of the solar, what's coming out of the Powerwall, where it's headed. The first one I actually went out and threw the breaker on the house just to see, does this thing work? That was day one before I sent the final payment through. It worked like a charm. And then about 2 weeks later, we had about a 5-minute actually power outage in Calgary as well, which I only noticed later when I looked at the logs. I hadn't realized the power had gone out, but it was about 5 minutes long in our neighborhood, and thus the alarm when I had to install to try to figure out. I need to know when this is happening, and not just when everything's so dead it can't run anything. So the one on the right is when I plugged the car in. So Tesla charges at about 20,000 watts, 16,000 watts, 72 amps, 240 volts, 18,000, something like that watts. So in this case, it's pulling 10,000 watts from the Powerwall, 3.9 from the solar, and 5.6 comes out of the grid. If you want to optimize that, you can tell the Tesla to charge at a much lower rate. So you can, if you're confident, you come home and it's noon, you got lots of solar, and you go, I can tell it just use 5,000 watts, and it'll just sit and it'll take what it can get over time. Again, hasn't been my priority yet at this point. I mean, I've got a few things inside the house which are probably my priorities of lowering our overall power usage and so on. Oops, wrong button. Oh. Probably okay. I'm an engineer. There we go. So to wrap up the last couple slides, the solar has worked for me flawless. I mean, KCP installed it, and I'll talk a bit more about them in a second. Has installed for 8 months now. We had a bad year for snow. I have a very inaccessible house roof right now. I may have to actually install some caged ladders or something like this to actually get me up there in a somewhat reasonably safe manner. I only produced 300 kilowatt hours for 4 months of the year. So, I mean, I don't think we could have had a worse year for a flat roof solar. Here's 12 inches, boom. Here's 8 inches, boom. And it never left. I couldn't believe it. The power optimizers are key. My overall experience has been great. The economics of the system for battery and so on remain marginal, I think is a generous term. For an average person. I mean, I think if you're looking at a 15, 20 year kind of number, I think you can get there. But it's certainly not I think there are better pieces of solar which pay off faster. Adding high-end battery system in and that kind of stuff isn't one of them right now. I mean, and when you look at it, really the batteries provide nothing from an economic return. I mean, there's a marginal amount of, we don't have time of day pricing. If we did, there would be a big boost there. But right now, all I get is that 5 cents T&D, which is, running the math on 5 cents is pretty tough kind of thing. But obviously, there's a lot of other reasons. One, I had some backup requirements for the flood. And then the rest is just because it felt like a good thing to do, wanted to do it. And I get to tinker with it a bit, at least virtually. I'm a big fan of the Tesla, big fan of their Powerwalls. They don't have they're coming up with an off-grid one very shortly. I'm going to give that a try on a next project. But I think their level of data they give me is a lot of fun. Last slide, KCP Energy did our design, install, and support. I do want a big shout out to them. They did a great design. This was Powerwall 1 or 2 or 3 in Alberta. They were definitely working it out. It was quick, efficiency, and Nick and the electrician, they spent a lot of time making it look good too, and the house, the conduits, the runs. I was really happy about that. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deane. I want a Tesla even more now than I did before, and the screenshots were awesome. That's as close as I'm going to get to a Tesla in the next little while, but appreciated the screenshots. Paula, you're up. Paula McGarrigle is a professional with over 20 years experience in the energy sector. She's a renewable energy superstar in my books. Thank you. She's the co-founder of Solus Energy Consulting. Big projects, big solar, big wind across Canada. And she has a really cool lead house that we're going to learn about. So Paula, come on up.
So I've been in the renewable sector since 1999. And I started at Suncor and I started up their renewable energy group. And at the time, I'd moved from the refining sector where I was integrating oil sands crudes and trying to buy refineries, and did a lot of work in the oil and gas sector, mostly in the refining and et cetera. And then I started up the Suncor Renewable Energy Group, and I knew nothing about renewable energy. And I thought, I need to learn. And I learned about wind, and I climbed a turbine, and I learned about solar, and I looked at this newfangled thing called thin film solar. And it was literally under a microscope at the NREL labs in Denver, Colorado. And it was pretty fascinating. And so I started up Suncor's group, and then I moved over to Shell, and then I left Shell and started up my own company, and it's been fun. And then after a while I went, why don't I put my own solar panels on? I'm in the sector. I should be doing this. But I had a little old 1947 house that I did a blower door test on it, and it was the equivalent of a 6-foot diameter hole in my house for air leakage. And so I thought I could fix this up, I changed the windows, I fixed up the doors, and then it was the equivalent of a 5-foot diameter hole in my house. So I knew it was drafty, definitely. I didn't know how bad it was, and then we decided to take the plunge and build a home that was energy efficient, but I didn't want it to look like a box. I even took a course at U of C on modern architecture, and I really wanted to love it, but I just couldn't. I loved the insides, but I didn't like the outsides, but I wanted something that was more craftsman style that kind of fit, but I wanted it energy efficient. And so after I built that, I put the solar, but the whole plan was we're putting solar PV on, period. So my metrics, so I've got a 3 kilowatt system. I have Loomis panels. They pride themselves as the best looking panels in the industry. I would agree. They are frameless. They have a black back sheet, and they're 250 watt panels. Skyfire did my install. Thank you. There's 8 of them that are south, 2 that are east, and 2 that are west. We installed them in 2014. We have 12 microinverters, and we have Enlighten Manager, which has got a funky app and everything. In terms of the facts, so we built the house in 2013, 2014. David Silburn from SAIT was our green architect, and we had a brown architect as well, and that was Suzanne Devonshire Baker, who does beautiful craftsman style homes. And the two of them worked together extremely well. We did have Tyler did all of our testing, and we ended up being LEED Gold, and I understand that's one of maybe 6 houses in Calgary with LEED Gold or plus, which is kind of shocking. It was a huge, what's that? It's not that hard. It's not that hard, although there was some things where we had to get the tradespeople to, no, that's wrong. You got to do it over. So we would have to go on a daily basis to check everything. Like they put too many studs, because we were doing 24 inches on center on the frame, and the guy built the entire main floor with 16 inches on center, so we had him take out studs. So there was a lot of learnings. He didn't do the second floor that way. They figured it out by then. So the house design was actually done to optimize for solar PV. The roof tile was chosen to match. We borrowed a panel, thank you very much, Dave, to bring it to choose our shingles so that it would match. Our brown architect was really freaked out and really wanted us to choose the house on the south side of the street so that the solar panels would be in the backyard and not in the front. And she was quite serious about that. The structural engineer was really freaked out as well, which I was surprised at, because we told him the whole time, and then at the end he said, "What? You didn't tell me?" I'm like, that was the best secret ever kept then. I mean, the whole plan was this was coming in. So we had to add in some additional blocking. And Dave, thanks for crawling around to identify where we had to put the blocking in and sort of figure it went out. The PME system, we permitted it after the house was built because it was easy from a permitting point of view. We didn't want to freak everybody out because we were doing a lot of kind of newfangled things, and we just thought we'd ease the pain by separating the permitting process. That's a picture of the wiring setup. Sorry, that's as fancy as I got to around 10 last night. So it goes into our panel. Anyway, you can't see any of that. So this is my house, and you can see on the south, this is taken last evening around 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So we do have some shading. It is a craftsman style house. Most people don't notice that there is solar panels on the house. We were the first house in the entire block to have the panels installed. We had a lot of the neighbors stop to watch the install. My kids' friends know the house as the house with the solar panels on it, and they're in grades. And a lot of their kids actually have come to the house on tour to have a look at the greenhouse, even though it's blue. And then so it's on the dormer. We've got 2 east and 2 west. So there's the dormer there. I had my husband yesterday go do all the calculations for the solar production, And so this is our annual solar production, so for 2015, 16, and 17. And then we did a comparison with load, and I had him enter all the numbers as well. So we're around 24% of our load. Obviously, way more in the summertime than in the wintertime. We have quite a steep pitch on our roof, and so that helps with the sloughing of the snow. And also, I totally agree, in the wintertime, it warms up a little bit, the snow moves off, and it tends to uncover itself. Now, we did have some unexpected things that happened with it. Pigeons. Oh, they drive me mental. Yeah. And at first we thought it was really cute. Oh, they're doves. No, they're not doves, they're pigeons. So we have pigeon poop everywhere. At one point in time, we had like 2 inches of pigeon crap on our roof. We've taken it off twice. But the paths are covered in pigeon crap. It's because initially we did not put in a pigeon guard and they nested behind it. And we thought it was lovely at the beginning. Isn't that lovely? And now we're like, get that thing out. So it's gone. We have the pigeon guards up. We did also have an enriched habitat that resulted from having our pigeons there. So we attracted what's called a Merlin Hawk. He stands about 2.5 to 3 feet tall. Really quite beautiful. I enjoyed watching him tear apart a pigeon for over 45 minutes. He plucked it first, plucked the whole thing first, and the magpies were all freaking out, and the pigeons left for about a day, but then they came back. So we now have what's called Operation Pigeon. So we have the pigeon guards on. Dave's crew came on. The frameless panels were not helpful for attaching the guards on. They fell off a couple of times. We had the opportunistic nesting and the entry by the pigeons. If it came loose at all, the pigeons would be there picking at it and trying to get in behind it. We tried sonic retardants. They don't work. But, yep. The spikes, the plastic ones don't work. The metal ones do work. But right now we have one area that's hard to get to that has a bunch of plastic ones on it, and they've cuddled right up beside the plastic ones. The netting is helpful, but with any kind of winds, the netting comes loose. So we're currently still on Operation Pigeon. It's an ongoing operation. Mission is not accomplished yet. I would love to maybe just even get some more hawks in. That would be great for an extended period of time. And I'm happy to answer any questions in terms of why we did it. We did it because the right thing to do. Often when people find out we have solar panels on our house, they say, that's really cool. What's the economic return? And I reply and say, so you have an Audi. What's the economic return on that one? Or you have granite countertops. Did you do an economic cost-benefit analysis against your granite countertops compared to linoleum? No, okay, this is a lifestyle choice. The economics, this is what I want for my energy. It sends a signal to others in the community that this is doable, but this is the right thing to do. For me, for my lifestyle, this is the right thing. And I really don't like people asking me my economic benefit analysis on it, because I don't ask you about what kind of mode of transportation and the economics on that one. This is my choice, and this is my lifestyle choice. All right, that's all I got.
Thank you, Paula. I like your house. Even with the pigeons, I still really like your house. It's one of my favorite lead projects that we've worked on. I didn't introduce myself, actually. I guess I should do that at the end now that everybody important speak. My name is Tyler Hermanson. I'm a green rater and an energy efficiency consultant here in Calgary. We do consulting and testing and verification work on all sorts of cool greenhouses, including Paula's, under all the different green building programs, net zero, LEED, all that stuff. So that's me. I guess that's important too. The company is called 4 Elements. Thank you. So now we get to turn it around to the fun part of the night. We've got all our speakers, right? I didn't forget anybody. So we're going to call all the speakers back up. We're going to sit here at the front. and we'll take some questions from the floor.
I just wanted to start off by saying thank you. It was an incredibly informative evening. I had a question for Deane. You mentioned, I think it was in the specification slide, you'd shown that you had an inverter paired with your solar panels, and then you had the 2 Tesla Powerwalls, which also have built-in inverters. And I was curious to know, do they work well in synergy, or is there any kind of complications having 3 different types of inverters?
Not that I've seen so far. I mean, they react instantaneously. Every now and then I'll see the odd, if a big load comes in, maybe it still sends a little bit of power to the grid while the net power is still heading somewhere else or something like that. But no, I mean, the Tesla Gateway and the Solar Edge, they seem to work perfectly together. I've seen no issues at all. They are, again, AC coupled, so there's not a lot of communication going on there.
Right, and they're not microinverters. So, like, if you have shade, does that mean all the panels stop working?
No, it's on 2 strings of 14, and every panel has one of the P400 optimizers on it. So even, I know more about snow, and because I only shoveled half at one point when I finally got frustrated and learned more about how you have to shovel all of the panel, not just skip the last 6 inches.
Right.
And I'd wait for that 6 inches to melt.
Right.
But even then, you could see each panel come on as it melted exactly until it got there. So it was key. Otherwise, I would have been waiting till April.
Great. And just finally, one of the biggest challenges you hear about with lithium-ion batteries is they're not as efficient in cold weather. So what I wanted to know is, with your Powerwalls, is your garage insulated or heated? And if not, how does that affect the efficiency of the Powerwall packs?
Yes, it is. Both. It's a solid 6-inch kind of insulated garage with glass doors. So and then it does have hydronic heating in it, which we keep set at like 14 degrees. So it never drops into deep temperature loss kind of thing. So it gets down to 14, but that's about it. So
awesome, thank you.
Is your system designed, does it function in such a way that your panels will charge your Powerwalls and back up your house on a loss of utility power?
Definitely. So the Tesla Gateway, which is it's the only ugly thing I've ever seen Tesla make. It's just a big gray box on the wall. So it acts as the automatic cutoff to the grid. And so inside of that is both the solar inverter and the Powerwalls. And they are happy to talk to each other while the grid is gone. So yeah, there's no issues there. Obviously if you drain it to zero, I assume they'll come back online if they see some power, or they'll just stop a little bit short or something like that. I haven't drained the Powerwalls down to zero.
So the question was how solar panels on the roof affect your insurance or fire protection, firefighter access, those types of kind of technical insurance procedural questions.
So my insurance is not affected whatsoever. When we did the install, we actually did an ice membrane over the entire roof, and then we installed the posts, and then we installed the shingles. And it's only because I read an article on that and convinced Dave to do it that way, and he said, whatever, okay, we'll do it. Thank you, Dave. But no problems. On the regulations on the permitting, so whoever your installer is going to handle all of the permitting in terms of does it have sufficient setback. I know in the US they want setback from the edges of the roof and also from the top as well in order to do cutaways in case there's a fire. I don't know what the regs are. Dave?
City of Calgary Fire Department will not go on a roof. Period. The TGI truss will burn through in 7 minutes, and they just won't put a guy on the roof.
Some of the horror stories we might have heard or kind of anecdotal stories we've heard do come from the States. Very different regulations, kind of a different approach. I think we can dispel a lot of those myths right here. So limits on the question is on limits on how much you can generate and get paid back for, or how that works.
So the microgen regs say that you really need to match your load as the max. Now, there's the way that it's drafted is it implies that it's on an AC basis, and it is not very strict or stringent or precise with regard to the regulations. Dave, do you have any commentary on that? On the microgen regs in terms of the sizing?
You can put as big a system as you want and apply the D sheet rules. You can see Paula spend about $100,000 in Solus doing all the consulting work to do D.
Yeah.
Bigger permit, you will get approval for larger systems.
I mean, you can go easily above what your load is, but the rules now are what happens to you and what's your price point, and are you exposed to time of day pricing, and you have different thresholds on that, whatever it is. But if you're trying to sort of stay in the most economic, is that your load profile matches your solar production. And that's the best. So as you guys were saying, is shift your load to during the day, and that's the most economic. Put the delay on for the washing machine. You don't need your partner at home waiting until the sun's out. You can just put the delay on the washing machine and the delay on the dryer, and it should be fine. Around noon could be good. Yeah.
I mean, you guys are really smart, but you should figure out washing machines and dryers. There's a manual that goes with those. It's quite an easy read, actually, compared to what you guys have done. The other thing you do is buy an electric car, or tell them that you're going to buy an electric car. Deane, I liked your comment about 50 kilowatts when I drove all day. That's still only like $5 worth of power. That's still a pretty good deal, right?
How much extra can you generate and give back to the grid? You can do that, but why would you want to? You don't get hardly anything for it.
If you look at the ancillary services charges, a lot of it is fixed, and so you don't actually get a huge amount back at all. So, I mean, and the other thing is, if you're a commercial building, is that your ability to sort of drop to a lower rating is difficult because it's all based on a 15-minute increment for what your interval says. Yeah.
There are definitely limits to what you can pay back to the grid. So, these systems are not your retirement plan. NMAX is not going to be happy to cut you a big check at the end of the year. They watch those numbers fairly closely, and the economics drive a fairly tightly designed system, right?
Just as a follow-up on that, so the Alberta Electric System Operator is changing our energy market over to an energy and a capacity market, which will mean you'll have a fixed price on your bill that you can't get rid of no matter how energy efficient you are at home or how much solar you have. So your ability will be slightly less to sort of be more energy efficient or economically driven. Just heads up on that, and that should be 2022. So the capacity market is not about the transmission lines. There is that charge as well, but the capacity markets is really about getting some certainty for on-demand power. So it's more towards having certainty on bringing coal to gas conversions and things like that.
Paula, should we feel good about paying that fee, that cost? I think we should feel okay with that. I think we're okay with it. What's the price we pay for a grid, the stability, cleaning the energy, and those types of things?
My question is, I know no one here has it on their house, but why is solar heat not being used? Is it our winter? I'm just curious because I got a boiler in my house. So.
We looked at that. We talked with Dave about it extensively, and at the time, I think it was $1.10 a GJ, and so the economics were far away, and so for us, it was a question of, I've got roof space, it's valuable, what am I going to put on it? And my choice was PV versus heat because I had limited roof space, and so that was my choice overall. Does that help answer your question? We did look at it, we did want to rough in for it. We also started to look at we ended up with on-demand gas fired with a fan coil and an HRV for our system for heating, but we did want to look at that, but just, I've got limited roof space, what do I do with it?
I mean, fundamentally, the cost of panels has dropped much faster than the cost of copper, and those thermal panels use a lot of copper. But I think Tom's done a lot of research on solar thermal and does solar thermal. He had some really interesting numbers last time we went for lunch. So I think even on solar thermal, the economics are changing, and so I'd always recommend checking the economics on your particular house and seeing what's going to fit on your particular situation.
Two strings of 6 panels or multiple strings?
Six strings of 6 modules, yeah.
Why not go with microinverters? And because as you mentioned, that if one is shaded, it brings out the voltage without electric.
I don't think it was a choice back then. They didn't. No. But probably Dave can comment on this better.
Wasn't a big issue with shading on that roof. It was quite well exposed, so there were no tree issues, and the string inverter was much cheaper, and it was just sort of the infancy of microinverters at that point.
$10 a watt back then, you had to watch the numbers pretty closely. If we couldn't afford the energy monitor in the first house, the string inverter might have been really over the top. Thank you for being an early adopter and driving this forward, though. So the question is just, with their expertise and perspective, what is their look ahead to political risk in the next election and this world?
Yeah, so I think it's a very pertinent question, because within 12 months from now, we're going to have everybody come to the ballot. So I think we do need to watch our vote. I do think we need to have a look at what are the platforms, what is expected to change with each party. I also think that the genie is out of the bottle, and that comes to cheap energy. When the Rep 1 came in at $37 a megawatt hour, I was in the room when the announcement was made, and there was an audible gasp in the room, even from industry players like myself. Like, we were quite surprised. As a result of $37 a megawatt hour for wind power, which frankly is cheaper than most gas, you now have consumers, industrials, and commercial that want cheap power, and are now starting to do competitive processes for renewable energy. So it's very hard to say, let's put that genie back in the bottle, because it's not coming back in the bottle. It's not happening. So I think all parties need to deal with that, and this is a very different world than when I first started in renewable energy in '99. When wind power at the time was probably $160 a megawatt hour. So we're here. I think all parties will need to deal with renewable energy and how it fits. Prosumers, as well as microgen, solar gardens, all sorts of distributed gen. And I think it's coming, it's here to stay. And I think Alberta's mode to decarbonize means that Alberta will stay competitive in an international market. And I think that's fairly apparent. I don't think anybody's arguing that. Its question is how, and how fast, and what will be done, particularly on the carbon side. So I think those are key questions, and I think everybody here's got a right to vote, and go and vote, but I would say go with an informed vote and have a look to see what it is, and talk to your MLAs and talk to the parties and say, what are you doing? Show me. What are you doing? I want to see what's happening, because the genie is out of the bottle.
I might add two things to that. One is my personal look at it is that the cost of all renewable energy continues to drop globally. And I think one thing you have to be careful if you're going to try to run economics is expecting power to be 50 cents a kilowatt hour in 5 years or something like that. We're not. How many hockey stick sort of price forecasts are out there? I think if anything, we're looking at a flat to declining power price over the next long term of the thing. I mean, you look at what's happening on the tender prices for global energy, it's going to come here. And I think the similar point I would make to that is, I suspect most people in Alberta will switch to renewable energy without ever knowing it. They won't be up on their roof shoveling snow off their solar panels. I mean, it's going to happen just because the grid will change. As the money flows and the capital makes sense, you're going to see that happen. I mean, I think, home solar offers all sorts of other really good benefits and immediate benefits and security and all these other things, but I think it's all going to happen together. So.
My question was just on getting green offsets for the remainder of the power when you're not net zero, and you can do that through programs like Bullfrog, which Paula and Chris use. So is it just a question about clarifying the insurance policy, making sure the insurance company would still cover the replacement of those panels?
Call your insurance broker and get the details. Well, a lot of it is going to depend on the cause, right, in terms of whether or not you're covered or not. So
it's part of the house. It's part of your house system. So if your house is fully insured, in other words, there's lots of tricks to insurance I don't get into, but if you have an insurance policy that covers the value of your house and the rebuild, it doesn't matter whether that's rebuilding a furnace or your solar inverter. It's part of the house fixtures.
It also depends on what you've paid for in your insurance.
That's what I'm saying. It has to be, but most sort of base system.
Call your insurance broker and play a fun game called What If? What if I accidentally left the oven on all day and burned my house down. What would happen then? And what if I got hit by lightning and this happened? And then just play that game. It's
At the payback period, if you're putting an electric car into the equation and you're comparing $1.10 or $1.30 per liter for gasoline, and you're pulling electricity off your solar panel, it's actually a 2-3 year payback period if you're doing significant mileage like I'm doing at the moment.
So clarification, I'll restate your numbers. I think it's a really important point where when you throw the electric car into the equation, using the financial offsets of replacing gasoline consumption with electrical consumption is really valuable and really quickly drives down the return on investment or the payback period on that solar system. That's a really important point. I think we forget, because we buy gasoline in liters and we buy natural gas in gigajoules, very different units. But gasoline is the most refined energy source we consume as consumers, and we pay an extraordinarily high price per gigajoule of energy in gasoline. So when you can offset that with electricity, which is also a very expensive and refined energy source, you're that much better. Natural gas still super cheap in Alberta, but it's important economics to look at. The question is about, how do we integrate solar and electrical on existing homes, and especially older existing homes. And this is a good general point and very varied. So you're going to have to look at it case by case. But in a lot of cases, you'll run into limited capacity on your supply to the house, and that will be undersized. And that is something the electrician would have to look at and potentially upgrade. Dave, do you want to comment on this? Yeah. The
Case by case.
And sometimes is it not a possibility?
You can upgrade the service from the transformer. You're going to pay for it. And depending if it's an overhead wire or a buried wire, it could be costly.
And this is thousands of homes have this problem. If you were built in the 50s, they never thought you might need 100 amps. I mean, that would have been crazy back in 1950. But we have standard homes now that go 200 amp service, much bigger service, and 300 amp service. And that's just part of upgrading an older existing home to kind of modern standards, and even more so with solar. So you'll want to talk to a professional electrician. It's absolutely doable. There's no house that we can't do solar and PV and these things on. But there's going to be some technical pieces that go with that, some upgrading of your service. So the question is kind of looking ahead to building codes and changes in the regulations coming down the pipe. Are we going to have to redesign communities or how developers lay out land or how we develop renovations to plan for this? And the house as well, okay. Regulated changes within the house.
To retrofit a house than it is to buy a house from a builder saying you can actually put panels on, we've got the conduit ready. There are builders out there like that.
Anything to add to there? I won't answer all of that.
Sorry, so you're concerned in an older house, how do you put a conduit down and how do you put the panels on?
Do we know of regulations? I think.
I don't know. Dave, do you know?
They're talking about making the house solar ready.
Oh, solar ready. Yeah.
And there is a plan afoot at the national level to change the building code towards a net zero ready building code, a stepped building code. By 2032, we would have solar ready homes mandated by code. Yeah, there are some builders that subscribe to the Solar Ready program. It's part of Built Green. It's part of LEED. It's a standalone program for Enercan. Solar Ready is the term you're looking for. That has a list of requirements that would ensure that house is ready for future solar panels. And it's a program. You can actually get a label for the house that says Solar Ready.
Is there any consideration, or are you aware of future policy change that could implement a cooperative, meaning, for example, you end up to have one section of land that you fully loaded with solar panels. And if we look at John Smith and little Auntie Debbie that lives out in downtown Calgary that are covered in shades, and there's no way that they can produce anything worthwhile from a solar perspective, they could buy the percentage of that section of land which would be and basically push that against their own power bill.
I think Paula's ready to jump in.
I got it.
Go ahead, Paula.
So this is in the U.S. This has happened. So it's called solar gardens, and similar to your community garden where you get a little plot of land and you put your potatoes in there and you put your tomatoes in there, and then you grow your stuff and you use the solar garden, you bring your produce home. So similar is been noodled upon by the Alberta government, and it's called a solar garden. Right now we have no policies associated with DG, so distributed gen or solar gardens, community gen, so we've nothing yet, but I know that the Canadian Solar Industry Association has proposed policies for that at the Alberta level. In Canada, electricity is regulated provincially and not federally, so it has to come from the Alberta government for it to be in effect in Alberta. But they have been noodling on that, and I've heard that there's something possibly coming out soon, but I don't know. But it has been talked about. Colorado has multiple solar gardens that are used for exactly what you're talking about, where it's not applicable for their house, but they want to be able to use the solar power. So they have a group, a community comes together, and they essentially buy strips of power off the community solar garden. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, Paula, but the issue, what happens is the construction of a field is, I would say, maybe 60% of what it would cost to install solar panels on a residence. So therefore, for the installer, with the carbon tax, getting a kickback and so forth, it's all lovely, but it would be great if somebody could actually produce a quantity of kilowatt hour of energy at the same price that they're being charged for their electricity at home instead of selling it for peanuts.
So there's a few things. One is once power hits the grid, you have things like the network, right, that you're using. But we need the regulations to be able to say, I need to net this off against mine. The issue is who pays for the grid in between and the backup. And so it's really quite complicated, but at least this government is looking into it. And I'm hoping that if we keep watching this space, that something may come soon. But we've certainly talked to the Alberta government about it, and the Canadian Solar Industry Association has talked to the Alberta government about it as well.
So the question is on the effect on property value when you have solar.
You mean our taxes or our property value?
Good clarification.
So when I did my house, I needed to get it assessed, and part of the issue was at first I was looking for EnerGuide 86 was the target, and the appraiser said, I don't have a clue what that is. So we moved over to LEED. He went, oh, I know LEED. I know what that is. And so what the home appraiser said is that any of these energy efficient homes now hold their own. They're not less for resale value compared to what the initial investment is that they do indeed hold their own. They're not considered less than. Whereas before, people say, oh, you spent all that money, but I'm not going to be able to get it when I sell the house again. I'm not going to be able to get that money back. But now, yes, indeed, you can. And as for the city of Calgary, they just assess me every year. It just bounces around. I have no idea. There's some wicked science that's used in order to figure out my property value, but I have no idea. It's not really related to anything, I think.
They probably haven't noticed you have solar panels, so I wouldn't worry.
Some department hasn't talked to another department, so it should be okay. What was that?
In the Microgeneration Act, there's language that says they don't get additional taxes.
That's good. Dave is saying it's actually in the legislation from Alberta government that says you can't actually be charged more tax because you have solar panels on your roof.
True, but you get charged for the Pigeons rental.
Yes.
Just really quick, I have one question of each of you. I'm wondering how long are you considering the prospect of going solar? And what was the one key factor that ultimately led you to make the decision?
For me, it was I had a new house with a optimized, oriented roof, and I had the opportunity. And I didn't have any incentive, so I did it before all this incentive.
I've just been thinking about 7 or 8 years, I guess, just hoping to plan it, and finally stars aligned, I guess. So I took the dive. So.
This wasn't something I had been considering, I don't think, for more than a week before I started making the calls. I think I had seen it on the news and thought, yeah. I seen it on the news and said, hey, I should do this. and started making the calls. And I think it was probably the incentive that made me think this is the right time. I should be making those calls. So thank you, EEA, for that.
And for me, it came down to seeing a news story that featured Dave, who was with Sedmec, or that was the company name, and he was showing his, I think he had 2 modules on your roof? Eight modules on his roof? And I said, wow, that's kind of cool. And that kind of stuck in my head, and then when I was redoing my roof, I looked it up online and called him up.
17 years ago, it was 30 bucks a watt then.
Ooh, that hurts.
Good question to close on. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us tonight. And thanks to our panel.